Can you tell me when the video's on?
Yep, it's on there.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Council of Governors meeting for February of the South Warwickshire NHS Foundation Trust. Delighted for those members of the public who are with us now or will be watching this video subsequently. If I can just ask all attendees on the meeting to ensure they're on mute, that would be great. I'd like to put on record my thanks to governors for their help during these challenging times for the NHS and Swift in particular. Today's meeting is going to be somewhat different in that we have asked the Chief Executive, Glenn Burley, Fiona Burton, the Director of Nursing, and the Finance Director, Kim Lee, to focus on their executive responsibilities. And therefore today, myself and the non-executive directors will be covering the various different assurance items. So hopefully that won't be too dysfunctional. And I'm thankful for my non-executive directors for standing up and being willing to do that on behalf of their colleagues. So the apologies for absence we have, and if I can ask colleagues to make sure that they've got their videos turned off, if they're not directed at their faces, that would be great. So we have apologies for absence from Jean Arrowsmith, Glenn Burley, Fiona Burton, Les Cabourn and Kim Lee. Meg Lambert, do we have any other apologies from colleagues?
Yes, we've got Najmi Qureshi, Callie Harrison and Alex Mann.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any new declarations of interest or qualifications for office that anyone needs to announce now? Please raise your digital hand if you do. Mike Wells?
Yeah, my British Legion conflict still continues.
Okay, thank you. And any other declarations of interest which haven't already been registered? Okay, Mike, if I could ask you to take your legacy hand down, that would be helpful. So the last set of minutes, was everyone happy with the accuracy of those last set of minutes? Could you please raise a digital hand if you were not? Rosemary?
Yes, on page 9, Meg, 20.04405 in the audit assurance report, the paragraph after the little b, third line, can we say it was recognised within A&E that the high volume of patients and current IT systems did present challenges? It's important that it was in the A&E department where the problems were.
Thanks, Rosemary, I've got that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. And Joe, did you raise your hand as well, or did that go down? Okay, so were there any other?
But I've put it down again.
Thank you, Joe. Were there any other amendments to the minutes? So the action points arising, which are on page 25 of the board pack. The first was to establish the governor involvement in the patient experience group, and that was completed. Thank you, Fiona and Meg. We'll come back to that later. The second was Ruth to hold a virtual meeting with Jane to discuss the induction programme for new governors. I understand that occurred and is now picked up by GPC. Thank you for doing that. The next was on the finance and performance assurance report. The Ruth provided a response regarding concerns raised by a member following treatment received in a care home, which the trust had commissioned some beds in. I understand that was done, Ruth, and is being discussed with Fiona. Is that correct, Ruth?
Yes, Fiona's looking into that.
Okay, thank you. Please keep us briefed. And then on the patient experience group, to invite nominations from the governors to join the patient experience group and patient safety surveillance committee. Jane volunteered. Thank you, Jane, for that. And
Welcome.
then And then further down on the Patient Safety Surveillance Committee, Jean volunteered. Thank you, Jean, with Mary as a deputy. Jean has been unwell recently, so on behalf of all of the governors, we wish Jean a speedy recovery. Then on the self-assessment of the Council of Governors, governors to submit their self-assessments to Meg, and that has been done. Thank you for doing that. And then on the Falls Group update, to discuss the possibility of sharing Falls e-learning training outside of the trust. That's been delegated, I think, David, to the Community Falls Group in terms of making that happen. And then finally, on the End of Life Working Group, and to obtain an update on the End of Life Working Group. And those meetings were cancelled because of the COVID pandemic, but papers were circulated virtually, but we need to ensure we don't lose sight of that very important work. Were there any matters arising that I've missed? Okie dokie. So colleagues, happy to move on. Please raise a digital hand if you're not. So the first is what would normally be the Glenn Burley slot. So I am Glenn Burley this afternoon in terms of a verbal update in terms of how things are going in the trust. And the first thing to say is an enormous vote of thanks from me as chairman of the board and chairman of the Council of Governors to all of our frontline staff for their day in, day out, enormous physical and emotional hard work in helping patients during this extremely difficult period of the COVID pandemic. Our staff have performed unbelievably well, and the support staff and everyone around the trust have pulled together in ways which are quite extraordinary. But I'm also conscious of the fact that for family members, for children of those who are key workers, the strains of the COVID pandemic have been very real. So thanks to families and loved ones who have supported our frontline and support teams during this challenging time. In terms of our position as a trust, the COVID pandemic passed its peak about 3 weeks ago for us as a trust, but we have been supporting other parts of our STP in terms of ensuring that COVID patients are looked after. So COVID capacity at the moment is gradually falling. We now have 51 cases who are COVID positive in the trust, including 8 in ICU. To put that in some context, we peaked at about 150 in mid-January. So the numbers are definitely coming down. And we plan to fully restart our elective work on the 1st of March. The staff COVID vaccination programme has gone very well. The trust has been helping PCNs by providing space at Stratford and Leamington. At least 2/3 of our staff now have had their first vaccination. And in terms of the STP as a whole, so Coventry and Warwickshire, the work on the first 4 JVCI cohorts to get the vaccination is on target. On Sunday, that showed that 90% of the over 80s in Coventry and Warwickshire had been vaccinated, 94% in the 75 to 79 age group, and just under 80% of the 70 to 74 year age group. So that those 4 cohorts should be completed as planned next week. And frankly, anything above 90% is a successful level of vaccination. The challenge going forwards is making sure that the rest of the population is vaccinated at pace, and that we don't allow some of the quite extraordinary anti-vaccination media posts that have been made on social media to put people off coming for the vaccination. If there's one piece of advice I can say to members of the public, apart from staying at home, wearing a face mask, and keeping a 2-metre distance, it is absolutely essential for you to go forward for your vaccination when offered. That helps your other loved ones stay safe. In terms of emergency capacity, a lot has been invested by the NHS across the country over the last 9 months. And in Warwick in particular, we now have a new fracture clinic, a new surgical pre-op, a new paediatrics assessment unit, and all of those opened in January. And we finally had planning permission for the car park granted, so that work will occur in due course. In terms of cancer performance has been a real challenge for the NHS during the pandemic. A number of us will know that from loved ones and maybe from personal experience. Our 62-day standard is around 62 to 65%, which comparatively is good, but frankly is nowhere near where we would want it to be. And to put it in context as to the challenge we have in terms of treatments, compared to last year, we're running at about 35 to 40% of the cancer treatments we were doing this time last year. Now that's well ahead of the regional average, but frankly is nowhere near where we want it to get. So cancer is a major focus, as well as getting the elective work going again from the 1st of March. We do plan to deliver on our profit and loss account for this year. We think we'll at least break even. And as we look forward, the whole financial regime in the NHS is still unclear as we enter the 21-22 planning cycle, which starts on the 1st of April. But at the moment, based on what we are being told as to the amount of money that will flow to us, it looks as though next year could be our first year of deficit. So clearly we are going to work very hard to ensure that that doesn't happen. I mentioned that the elective work would start up fully again on the 1st of March, but overall our level of elective recovery is going well compared to regional and national averages. But we do expect to have to continue to help others within our region who are facing higher challenges. Some members of the public, and I know governors will be aware of the new legislation talking about integrated care. That is something that we welcome. It fully supports our work into the community at place, which we've been focusing on strategically for the last 4 or 5 years. The devil, as ever, will be in the detail, but we believe it is the right direction of travel for the citizens that we serve. The biggest issue that we face, and it goes back to my introduction at the start of this meeting, is our staff well-being. I know Glenn and all of the board are concerned at particularly the emotional well-being of our staff. It has been a year where they have experienced things emotionally of a level and of the type that they would never have done before in their careers. So we're doing lots of work to try and support them in every way possible. But we do recognise the seriousness of the need to look after the emotional well-being, particularly of our frontline staff. So, and the final thing is we do get the staff survey results on Friday in this extraordinary year, and we do expect the results of that staff survey to continue to suggest good progress at Swift in the opinion of our staff. So that's my verbal update. Any questions from colleagues, please raise a digital hand if you have. And that's, I think, sorry, I'm just trying to see. Pat, I think you've got your hand raised.
You talk about supporting staff. Can I ask you what support is being offered to administrative staff?
The same level of support and that we offer our frontline staff as well, Pat. So
right.
and Pope, we're not treating any members of staff differently. We just are conscious that for those members of staff who have been at the front line and who have maybe had to work in different wards and have seen things that typically they wouldn't be exposed to, we are particularly concerned for them.
Understandably, yeah.
Ruth, I think your hand is raised.
I would just like to reiterate and compliment the staff, because I see that the patient recommendation percentage was 95.7, that they would recommend their hospital, which is terrific.
It is, Ruth, and it's always about the quality and attitude of the people that we employ, and I couldn't be more proud of the team at Swift. And Richard?
Yes, my question's actually about outpatients, because there are a lot of patients who have follow-up appointments with long-term conditions. So in terms of the restoration, a lot of those people have obviously been understand that they have been delayed, but now of course they're getting concerned about getting their appointments that they're missing. So do you have any comments about that?
I'd recommend citizens generally to start to treat the health system as they would have done before the pandemic. So at its simplest, phone up your GP, phone up the outpatients, get back into going to visit the dentist. I worry about dental health, particularly for youngsters after the last year. So start to be demanding of the health system. We're here to serve you. And so start to phone up again and, if you like, in an appropriate way, badger us to make sure we're doing a good enough job to look after you. And finally, Helena.
Hi, yes, thanks, Russell. Just to say that, it's been quite a difficult winter in the community, as well as obviously COVID on top of everything else. So just to sort of, the out of hospitals I've worked ever so sort of differently and, more challenged, because obviously you're walking into the things that you don't obviously normally do. And also everyone's, worked absolutely tirelessly, working well over their contracted hours and everything else. So we always try and, boost everybody up, but it's very, what's the word? It's very draining coming out of the winter. So staff well-being is really important, just to sort of reiterate your message, really.
No, thank you, Helen. And our frontline teams, when I use the word frontline, I also obviously mean our teams who are out there in the communities, are fantastic. And as you say, just the practicalities of winter, the bad roads and everything else sort of adds to the burden. Colleagues, happy to move on? So we therefore move on to the Finance and Performance Assurance Report. Simon, please.
Okay, Russell, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll try not to say everything that Russell just said to you as a consequence of the F&P report, but F&P, the papers you can see cover the meetings of November last year, December last year, and then we've subsequently had a meeting at the beginning of February. So my report will cover all of those three areas. I don't propose to read all of the reports out, but just to give you a précis of them. But in essence, we're keeping the meetings tighter than usual to allow the execs as much time as possible on the front line, and have really focused our discussions around COVID, the numbers, the people issues, and other issues that have been worked on as a matter of course at the moment. I think, Russell, in terms of A&E is challenging. Numbers are down on people coming to A&E, but the pressure in the system means performance is anything from 75 to last week at 95% of A&E. And that there are some flow issues too around A&E. The COVID thing, I won't say much more than Russell has said, but it's in the discussions we've had with Helen and the execs attending F&P, I think there's a very significant level of assurance that this issue is firmly gripped. There's a lot of very good work going on COVID, and we're in very safe and capable hands there. The issue that comes up most often than not around COVID that is hard for us to fix, the turnaround times on COVID testing from CWPT, and there's a lot of breakdown on equipment and other issues related to it. There has been some recent improvement, but it remains one of the challenges. Russell touched upon cancer, and cancer has been a topic we've discussed, and it is clearly a very important topic for the Trust. In terms of 2-week waits, we are in a better place than we are on longer waits. Many of the challenges, or the particularly difficult challenges, sit around breast, where demand, should I say, outstrips supply quite markedly, and around gynae. And in both cases, there's a lot of granular focus on trying to keep those moving along as much as we possibly can. But waiting lists on both breast and gynae are quite high, 300 on the 62-day waiting list for breast the last time I looked, and 151 for gynae. I think it's fair to say that, you know, the executive teams and the staff really are very much in the trenches on dealing with the problems the hospital has at the moment. I think the feedback is generally that morale is very good, but staff are very pressurised, and we need to manage the situation carefully. And one of the things that was very clear in our February meeting that came from Helen was they are trying to ensure that as we move out of COVID and move into the restoration phase, and Russell told you that we are moving towards that from the beginning of March, and there's clearly a lot of good work going on in that area. But as we move in that direction, to make sure we allow the teams to come up for air a little bit and pause to catch their breath before we press on at too fast a pace. And there was a very strong call for what they called a fire break in that respect. I need to put my glasses on now. I can't read that thing at 2 feet away. So in terms of working with the third-party sectors to keep things going, I think relationships are very good, particularly with Nuffield. And I think the teams have kept things going very well there. But there are some challenges generally around the system with bureaucracy, which they're having to fight their way through. But that's quite inevitable in a large public sector organisation. In terms of numbers, Russell's already told you we are looking to break even, and Kim has, you know, in terms of our assurance, there's a significant level of assurance that is in fact what will happen. So far, to get to the break-even point, we've had £12.7 million worth of top-up from the centre around COVID. But the STP is looking to make a £9.8 million loss in the year, and there's an element of that loss that we have to absorb in getting to our break-even. But the assurance you should all have is, like COVID and the operational side, the numbers are very firmly gripped. Currently, we're reporting a surplus of 391k. Next year is unclear, other than it will carry on with the same sort of financing system as we had, and I think Russell's given a bit of clarity on that, so I won't go through any more of that. We have had some good discussions around productivity in several meetings, and I think there's a lot of good work being done on productivity, but we've parked that temporarily while we're dealing with these pressing issues, and we'll come back to look at those probably from Q2. And with that, I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any questions or perspectives? Roger?
Thank you. Simon, I noticed the report refers to the turnaround times for the pathology network being one of the worst in the country. This has been an ongoing argument and difficulty that's been reported many times. Have UHCW actually recognised and got a grip on this, or are they still floundering and unable to deliver? Because clearly not knowing whether people in ED are COVID positive or not causes a great deal of worry and resource hungry beds while the pathway is sorted out.
Right. So I would say there has been some improvement, Roger, in turnaround times. That was reported at the last board meeting, but turnaround times are still patchy, and there's issues of equipment failure and consumables absence and things like that. So I think if you were to ask Helen, as I did at the last F&P meeting, I think you sat in and listened to this, that she would say it's by no means perfect, that it's very hard for us to get any significant change in what they're doing, but there is some marginal improvement. So, and I don't think I can add any more than that. I don't know enough detail underneath that to add any more. Russell may have.
Bruce, do you want to add a bit of detail from yesterday?
Yes, thank you, Russell. Not to undermine what Simon's been saying, but we had clinical governance yesterday, and it's at the forefront of clinical governance mind as well. Although it wasn't on the agenda, I did ask Helen how she felt it was going, and off the top of her thumbnail sketch, which was very similar to where Simon's described it yesterday, she did say, and it does seem like there's a bit better understanding of what we're looking for. So I think it's got a chink of light, but let's see a few more weeks like that and some performance increase.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. And any other questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to the finance assurance report. Okay, Simon, again with you. You sort of touched on it a bit, but anything you'd like to add?
I don't think there's a great deal really to add to what I said, Russell. I tried to wrap the two up together to a certain extent, and you'd add beyond that. I think that cash is in a good condition for the trust. I haven't got the exact number with me, and the use of agency labour is very firmly under control, although it is increasing as pressure increases. And overall, I think we are, well managed financially and should be assured. But no more numbers to add to other than the ones I gave in F&P.
Okay, thank you. We're sitting on over 50 million of cash because of the change in the financial regime, albeit I expect some of that to be clawed back. Any questions from colleagues, or have we already touched on it? Mary? You're on mute, Mary.
Sorry. In the agency section, it's the agency use of other staff which has shot up. Do we know why that is?
I think my understanding when I've discussed this in the past, Mary, is that's typically things like computer staff and those sorts of things. And the amount of work that's been done in the IT area is legion, really, because we have so many people working from home, so many devices they have to maintain, and there's been a lot of programming work done on anything from starters and levers to actually, on a more prosaic level, to actually keeping the front line working. So I would imagine that's the most significant part of this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, colleagues, shall we move on then to the clinical governance assurance report? Bruce, over to you, please.
Thank you, Russell. Good afternoon, everyone. The clinical governance assurance report is covering November, December and January. Good attendance and very good engagement. And I'm very pleased to report overall to the Council of Governors that with my NED colleagues, we continue to be substantially assured to provide safe, effective, compassionate and trusted care to our population from the perspective of clinical governance. We did operate in concise mode because of the pandemic, December onwards, and that continues at the moment, although we spent a little longer on it yesterday, and I think in March it'll just extend a little bit more, so that's good. Coming back, but good reporting all the way through. I'm not going to read through the reports that are attached here. They are the board reports that were submitted to the board subsequent upon the meeting of clinical governance, but I'd like to pick one or two things out. Cancer services are at the top of we want to watch these, we want to see them improving. So it was very good to hear in November that we have a lead consultant for cancer care, Dr. Hughes Webb, and he is in his spare moments, because he's also a pandemic expert and at the front line, going to pull that together and make sure that we have a strategy and indeed an awful lot of detail that is already in his mind that needs doing from a clinical perspective on that. For the December meeting, that was the first concise mode one. So again, good reports and a good debate on the things that we needed to have challenge and debate upon. I'm sure Richard can provide a corroboration for that when he's speaking later. And for January, the largest item there was, of course, the Ockenden Assurance Report. This is the independent inquiry into maternity services for Telford and Shrewsbury. It's their first interim report. It is a very disturbing read, and you will see a lot of spotlight on this, both at clinical governance forward and at board. And I don't think I need to add anything else on that, but I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Just before I invite questions, David G, could I just ask you to turn your video off just for your own privacy? So questions to Bruce, please raise your hand if you need to raise your hand. Thank you, David. Okie dokie, Mary.
Just to say that at a pre-meeting of governors today, just for assurance for members of the public, the governors will be having the Ockenden report as a major item on the next Council of Governors meeting to follow up what actions were needed, if any, and how progress is being made.
Thank you, Mary.
And last week at last week's board, we had a self-assessment come through, didn't we, Bruce, on the Ockenden report. Okay, so we'll move on then to patient experience assurance report. Again, Bruce, with you.
I'm being Fiona Burton for this slot. That's her normal reporting on this. She has very kindly done a good front page, I think, on the basis of the 4 questions that we ask at clinical governance. How do we know our service is safe? What improvements have we been made? What are we most proud of? And what are we most concerned about? And what are we doing? I'm not going to read through it, but I think that you'll see that there's a fairly comprehensive set of measures on the hospital there. We did talk about this set of data in quite a lot of detail at the last patient care committee. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Mary, I'm not sure whether yours was a legacy hand. Roger?
Thank you. I noticed that the medical examiner model is something that you've put in there as being very, very proud of. Are we able to get that message out to the wider region and possibly nationally that this is something that helps in understanding patient experience and is to be commended to everybody to adopt?
I think we'd certainly commend it, Roger, but I don't think it's an original Swift idea. I think we shamelessly copied it from someone else elsewhere. So it's already out as a great model for doing things, and it's taken a little bit of time just to get the recruitment and indeed the administrative support for that. I think we talked about it this week at Clinical Governance. We need to pull together the various databases that are in there, and I think it'll become really very powerful.
Perhaps another one for the integrated care system to adopt as standard operating procedure.
Thank you, Roger. And Richard?
Yes, actually, my question's on the same section, talking about the bereavement service, and of course the figures given here are. There's been considerable increase in demand on this service. Has there been additional staff on there? Because I can imagine this can be quite traumatic for the staff as clearly as it is for families of the patients as well.
I'm sure it's very, very difficult for the bereavement service, but also for those wards that are having a far higher rate of death than they normally do. That's where Russell referred to seeing things more frequently that they would not normally see. So we're treating all our staff very evenly with opportunities to support them. And I don't believe that there has been any shortage in that particular area, Richard.
Okay, thank you.
I think our bereavement service do a phenomenal job week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out. But the other team that we don't often talk about are our chaplaincy services, who again during COVID have done an absolutely exceptional piece of work supporting those who have a faith need at the end of life. So it's worthwhile just recognising them as well. Okay, thank you for being Fiona, so to speak, Bruce. Colleagues have to move on to the audit assurance report. So we're over to you, please, Rosemary.
Good afternoon, everyone. This covered our meeting back on the 9th of December. We did meet yesterday, so I can update you on a few of the points covered in this this paper. So we're coming towards, obviously looking towards the end of the year, and with that Deloitte, who are the external auditors, with their audit plan, and they updated us on a few points there. One of the most important points for the governors to be aware of is that this year, like last year, the quality accounts, there will be no requirement for an external audit of the report or of any of the quality indicators. Again, this is obviously another COVID restriction, and the NHSIE have also announced that going forward it will not be mandatory, it will be optional as to whether trusts choose to have the work externally audited. So that's something to consider going forward. Deloitte's have also they've started their planning for the year end, so have provided sort of detailed checklists for finance teams in terms of the going concern statement. This is not something we are concerned about, and I do know that Deloitte will take a very pragmatic approach, so I'm not looking for them to get into huge amounts of detail on that area, given that we are able to show quite strongly our going concern position. Finally, the charity accounts have been signed off now. They were signed off, I think, in January, with a clean opinion there. The other areas just to bring out from the work, internal audits had looked at about 2 years ago, they looked at something called IT starters and leavers. This was all around the controls that were in place for new employees, new and leaving employees, and most importantly, leaving employees, around both the IT assets, so people's laptops, but more importantly, from an audit committee's perspective, was the access to the network systems. And in terms of an update, yesterday we had a very assuring meeting where the head of IT security from SWIFT attended the meeting with the head of technology, giving us a lot of assurance about all the work that they have now put in place with new systems, including systems which they've written in-house, which gives much better control over both the assets, but more importantly, controls when staff leave the organisation. There is work still to be done, and there's always the human factor that when staff leave, it is up to the managers of people in each department to inform the IT department that people have left, and so there's the communication exercise which needs to happen and needs to be ongoing, so that people are always aware that when staff leave, they need to communicate to the IT department. But we were very satisfied in terms of the processes and systems that are now in place within the IT department when somebody leaves, or when somebody's account is dormant for a short period of time. The other area I just wanted to bring out was the annual Data Security and Protection Toolkit, which is an annual requirement focusing on very much the IT security and information governance controls of the organisation. Obviously, last year we noted that we were unable to meet, I think, 4 of the standards. And so we had to give a report that said standards were not met. As of yesterday, we were informed that they are anticipating to be able to give a clean bill of health this year, that they anticipate that the trust will be able to meet all of the standards for the current year, and that will be reported in June. That's all I wanted to bring out. Any questions?
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you, Rosemary. So any questions or perspectives to Rosemary? Okay, very clear. Thank you very much, Rosemary. Okay. So we'll move on then to the Ellen Badger Hospital Site Redevelopment Update Report. Mike?
Thank you, Russell. So since last Council of Governors, we have been moving at pace with the project. The planning application was submitted to Stratford District Council to plan on the 23rd of December, and that covers the whole development, so that's both phases. Receipt was acknowledged on the 4th of January, but the documentation isn't yet available on the e-planning portal, so it's not out for consultation yet. Apparently that can take anything up to about 12 weeks. We've been engaging Health Watch to do a survey of the local population on what they think the health and wellbeing centre should offer, because that's the bit that really the community needs to get into, and they'll be the making or breaking of it, really. Survey was initially issued electronically and paper-based, and you could even ring in just in the middle of December, and just after Christmas, Isabel from Health Watch gave the project board an update, which was very positive. They had about 240 replies, lots of positive feedback, so that was good. And then since Christmas, Health Watch have been really active, making sure it stays in people's minds, so that it's constantly up on Facebook in Shipston and stuff like that. And then the project boards and design team are meeting regularly, and the project board is meeting next Wednesday. So that's when I'll find out what they've been up to in the last few weeks.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think the other thing which is relevant to just for members of the public is there is a bed review going on to make sure that we understand the right number of beds in the Ellen Badger Hospital as we go forward. Questions or perspectives, Joe?
I see Mike smiling wryly at me. He'd expect me to talk about the Ellen Badger, which I can almost see from where I'm sitting. Because Glenn's not here, I can't have the sort of chivvy that I might have had otherwise, but I am concerned that we have a little bit of local difficulty with a few people starting a Save the Ellen Badger campaign, because they've got their knickers in a twist about what is actually happening. And my plea is that we do as much as I know Mike does and I do, but that we have got to get the messaging out there, particularly when people being consulted about the wellbeing centre have said, well, why do you want to know? Why are you building it if you don't know what you want in it already? Which has been a very Shipston response, but it isn't exactly helpful. So anything we can put together that helps get the truth out there would be really, really helpful. Otherwise, Mike, well done. Everybody else, brilliant. I think it's going to be fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Glenn and I met with Ryan Stoughton last week, who's chairman of the League of Friends of Ellen Badger. And I think clearly I've always been of the view that people can hold different perspectives and have different views as to the best way forward for different things. What we outlined to our friends at the League of Friends was that we are committed to the development of the Ellen Badger project. We see it as a two-phase project, which we just think is sensible. And the primary objective is to deliver a facility which helps people in Shipston have longer, happier, healthier lives. I think it will take a while of a couple of months until everyone is on the same page, which I hope happens. But behind the scenes, and I know that Mike and others are working, as you are, Joe, in the community to try and ensure a balanced debate. We need to just ensure we're doing the right thing for the future. rather than the right thing for today. And then I think,
Thank you.
No worries, Joe. And I think David, is it David G? Have you got your hand up, David? Okay, maybe not. Apologies. Someone's got their hand up with the initials DG. Otherwise, if you could take your hand down or take yourself off mute.
Can you hear me now?
I can, David. Thank you.
All right. Being my nearest hospital, I've been following this closely, as you might imagine. And without going into detail, I think the reports and answers that the Trust have put out have not been particularly helpful and have not, I know, answered people's questions. But I won't go into detail here.
Okay, well, that's helpful, David. What would be, I think, useful for Glenn, and maybe Mike, is if you could just drop me an email outlining areas where you think we could have done better. That would be helpful. And any other perspectives from colleagues? Otherwise, as Joe said, thank you very much, Mike, for your hard work. We then move on to the End of Life Working Group update report. Ruth, obviously, as I said in the action points, we've had the challenge of meeting in the COVID situation. Is there anything you'd like to say, Ruth?
No, there's been no end-of-life meetings of the committee. There've been papers pushed around. I think they're putting together a whole new way of running the committee. But as far as I'm concerned, there haven't been any general end-of-life committees yet.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. I think what is really positive, though, is in terms of our frailty and end-of-life services. We've had 2 new consultants join us in the last couple of months, which I think is really good news in this whole area. Any questions to Ruth or myself on the end-of-life work? And Ruth, if you can keep me briefed as we start to come out of COVID and get the normal business processes going again, if you can keep me briefed if you're unhappy with progress on the End of Life Working Group, please just drop me a line. The car park project board update. Roger?
Thank you, Russell. You've actually stolen my thunder already, if people were paying attention, to confirm that we now have planning permission for building of the car park. There's been some fairly solid discussions with Warwick District Council, but this has resulted in them granting us planning permission. Means we can now get on with ordering the materials and trying to set a delivery timetable once the delivery time for those the steels particularly can be ascertained. There will be decant arrangements for staff who are currently using the Pickering site. But these can now obviously be firmed up once the delivery timetable is more certain, and the details will be supplied in due course. The project group is meeting, in fact, in a fortnight's time, and it may well be able to give much more information after that work has been done and reported to the board. So that's where we are at the moment. It is definitely coming.
Great, thank you, Roger, and thank you for your hard work. Any questions on the car park? Super, thank you very much. Then we've got the Falls Group update report. David, anything you particularly like to say?
No, because of COVID, there haven't been any meetings. I've seen the figures which have shown an increase, but this very much reflects the frailty and effects of COVID on patients. Regarding the project that I was trying to start in conjunction with the Stroke Association, that obviously has not moved for the same reason.
Okay, thank you, David. Any questions to David? David, if, as I said to Ruth on the end of life working group, as we come out of the COVID pandemic and we get back into the old normal ways of working, if you can keep me briefed if we're not making the progress you would hope on the Falls group, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
The patient experience group update. Jane, our volunteer, anything you'd like to comment? Jane, you may be on mute. Still can't hear you, Jane. Okie dokie. So we'll move on then to the patient safety surveillance. Okay. Sorry, Jane.
Sorry, I dozed off. I apologise.
That's okay. It happens to me all the time. On the patient experience group update, Jane, anything you'd like to say?
Do any of their meetings? There haven't been any scheduled during the time that I've been for it. So there's one coming up in February.
Super. Well, look forward to hearing about that at the next Council of Governors. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
And then the Patient Safety Surveillance Committee. Mary, I assume there hasn't been a meeting there either?
Yeah, it has been a meeting, Russell. There was a meeting this week.
Oh, great.
It was the first time a governor was invited to attend, and at very short notice I had to attend in Jean's place. And I must apologise, for some technical reason I didn't get in until about 40 minutes after the meeting had started. And as it was a concise meeting and a lot of verbal reports, I must confess I didn't really follow some of it. But certainly the agenda is interesting, where we're doing CQC updates and talking about discharge issues and falls and some very important issues. So hopefully I'll have a better report next time, or Jean will have a better report next time if we can actually attend more of the meeting. But they certainly do cover some ground.
Great. Well, thank you, and look forward to hearing the next report. Any questions to Mary? Okay, well then just turn on to some, if you like, technical governance matters. The subcommittee terms of reference annual review. Meg, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
No, Russell, just take the report as read with the various changes highlighted as track changes on each of the terms of reference.
Okay, and this is for approval, isn't it, Meg?
Yes, please, yes.
Okay, any questions or perspectives on the tracked changes to the terms of reference? Please raise a digital hand. If you're not happy to approve, could you please raise a digital hand? Okay, duly approved. Thank you, Meg. And then the GPC meeting of the 14th of January. Anything you'd like to add, Mary? You need to come off mute, Mary.
Apologies. Yeah, just a couple of points, because I'll take it as read. But as we've already said, it was agreed that the meetings would be concise, and so we have set the Council of Governors agenda accordingly. We've already talked about the approval of governors on the relevant groups. The terms of reference, I'm sure we've just looked at, but I just want to stress that the General Purposes Committee will now look to oversee training and induction for governors, and in particular set up a working group for governors to draft develop an induction programme. I anticipate that group will be set up sometime in the autumn to prepare for the election of governors the following year. As we all know, we've put training sessions on hold at the moment, unless there's anything we can do with the external trainer, because we don't want to put any pressures on our staff at this point in time.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank
you, Mary. Any questions or perspectives to Mary on the GPC? Again, to Mary and all governors, the executives really do appreciate your flexibility during this difficult time. The Patient Care Committee meeting of the 25th of January. Richard, anything you'd like to add?
Actually, reading through what I've written on there, I did note in there that the Clinical Governance Committee has 3 NEDs. In fact, usually we get 4 or 5 NEDs there, which is actually very helpful for me as a governor with a responsibility to at some point to be looking at the appraisal of NEDs. That's useful for me to see them in action. Of course, Bruce has already mentioned about this, that there is a lot of very helpful and very detailed discussion at the Clinical Governance Committee. So those are my comments on my attendance of that committee. In terms of the Patient Care Committee, of course, we're in concise mode. Normally, we're aided in this with the Director of Nursing so that we can look through some of the board papers on patient measures. On this occasion, we decided to go a slightly different route and just to concentrate on clinical governance. So I think certainly from my perspective, I understand clinical governance a hell of a lot better because we really did go into great details with Bruce. So I'm really grateful for the update that Bruce gave us and the talk he gave us and going through his papers in quite a lot of depth. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Richard. Any questions or perspectives to Richard? Okay, thank you very much, Richard, for your hard work in that committee. And then the Business Oversight Committee meeting of the 21st of January. Mike, anything you'd like to add?
Not really, only to say that, I mean, the minutes are there and you can see what we discussed. But one of the things was, which hasn't been mentioned by Rosemary, was the chances of risks being introduced because of the way that everyone's changing the way of working so quickly. And we were given assurance on that actually it had been being talked through. So other than that,
okay, that's
questions.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions to Mike on the Business Oversight Committee meeting? Thank you, Mike, for your chairing of that. We've then got a report on resignation and appointment of governors. Meg?
Thanks, Russell. That's just to be taken as read. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any questions from colleagues? Thank you. So any other business? Please raise a digital hand if you have any other business. Any questions from governors? Mary?
Yes, it's just really an update on any supply issues that we've got, whether it's around Brexit or other supply issues. I suppose mainly Brexit. We were assured last time I asked that that we didn't know of any issues. I just wondered whether that's still the case.
Okay, Rosemary, if you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. I don't think there have been any significant supply issues coming out as a result of Brexit. I would imagine that has been partly aided by the fact we've been doing so little elective work during the COVID pandemic. But I'm aware of no supply issues coming out of Brexit. Rosemary, do you want to add anything?
No, I was talking to sort of one of the risk managers yesterday, sort of on that subject, and I think all the planning that went in at a national level beforehand means that there's been sufficient stocks within the country. I wouldn't say that the risk has not necessarily gone away because of that stockpiling. You know, there are still serious supply issues nationally, not just medical, but all, and it could be supply for equipment, buildings, etc. Also, that we're going to hit challenges with going forward. So we're not out of the woods yet. So we do need to still make sure we can keep it on the risk agenda.
I'm an optimist when it comes to Brexit, Mary, but I know others aren't. Ruth Cowan, any questions or perspective? Sorry, Ruth, you had a question?
Yes, please. Mine's about volunteers. I've got several friends not volunteering to our trust, but to other trusts, and they have a huge amount of documentation and hoops to go through to volunteer to perhaps just sit with someone for lunch or serve tea or whatever. Do we have these ridiculous regulations and hoops that people have to go through to volunteer at the trust?
I think it depends what type of role you want to take, Bruce. I am aware of one of our retired anaesthetists who'd been working at the trust for decades, who retired just last September and is having an absolute nightmare in terms of trying to volunteer to help on the vaccination program, which sounds extraordinary.
Yeah.
So I think there are challenges, but it does depend on the type of role. But the different levels of requirement, I would need to come back to you on, Ruth. But there are things which I look at in despair at how difficult it is for people who are fully competent having to jump through some very, very strange hoops to help keep the vaccination program going at the pace it has.
Well, this isn't for vaccination. This is for volunteering just in the hospital, just helping on the ward or,
I think at the moment with the pandemic, I think the rules have changed, but I'd need to come back to you, Ruth, on what the latest rules are. But I know it's more difficult than it has been. Just keeping things going then. David G, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Following Grenfell Tower, they're not quite in the same league, but has the wooden cladding on the Stratford car park been checked?
Okay, I asked this question about 18 months ago, David, and I was assured we didn't have a cladding problem. But Meg, if you can minute for me to confirm the issue on the cladding at Stratford car park, I will do so, David. So I have asked the question in the past and I was assured, but I will double check on the Stratford car park.
Okay,
Mike?
Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. It was just on Ruth's comments about volunteering. So I'm a volunteer gardener at Ellen Badger and then have been meeting and greeting at the COVID vaccinations at Stratford. And it wasn't that painful to get in at that level.
I think Kathy Wagstaff has put into the message that because we're trying to reduce footfall within the hospital, it has become more difficult, or we have reduced the number of volunteers in the hospital related to COVID. But thank you for volunteering at Ellen Badger, Mike. And then Richard?
It's just a comment that I attend the Diabetes Clinical Network, and at the last network we were given an update on COVID and diabetes. So it's just to reassure actually the message that COVID is a terrible condition and you have to try and avoid it. In terms of diabetics, it causes insulin resistance. It causes reduces the secretion of insulin for those for type 2 diabetics, and the treatment itself, the dexamethasone, also raises blood sugar. So all of this makes it very much more difficult for inpatient staff to look after diabetics. And it appears that there may be a long-term effect as well. So that with some people, the insulin resistance persists after they recover from COVID. And there have been some people who have had asymptomatic COVID and have become diabetic because of their infection with COVID. So all the steps of the way, COVID does not like diabetes, and you really, really should try and avoid getting the infection.
No, thank you, Richard. That's a good point on which to close today's meeting. If I can just reinforce Richard's exhortation that taking COVID seriously and taking personal responsibility for wearing a mask, staying at home if at all possible, and keeping social, getting your family, loved ones who are not getting vaccination taken. Please encourage them to do so. You are protecting. You have. I look at the next
Yes, I think we've lost Russell. Can people hear me? Sue here.
Yes,
Sounds
yes,
good.
thank
Yes,
you.
yes, but I can't see
Okay,
Russell.
so I think that Russell has probably had connectivity issues, but I think he was wrapping up anyway, the confidential part of the meeting. Have we still got Meg?
Yep, I'm here, Sue.
Hello, Meg. Am I right in thinking that we are going on to a different meeting now, the confidential section, and does it have a different login?
Correct, it does, yes. So we're this is the end of the public meeting, so we need to log off, leave this meeting, and then log on to the separate link for the confidential meeting.
Okay, well, fingers crossed, we'll all make that passage safely. And if Russell is not there, then somebody else will step in and chair.
Are we doing that straight away? Sorry, or are we waiting until the time it was set?
We're doing it straight away, Jo.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you in about 25 minutes then at my rate.
Everyone, we will be patient.